I don't think silence has a weight until it starts to settle on your chest. The call came while I was folding wrapping paper into corners sharper than they needed to be. The ribbon I'd chosen this year was a pale red, not quite crimson, not pink either. I'd ironed it flat the night before with the old travel iron I still kept in the linen drawer. I liked how it held its shape. Caleb's name lit up on the screen like it always did. The photo I'd taken of him when he was 12 still showed, even though he was now a man with thinning hair and a mortgage I'd helped with. His voice came through small. "We were thinking maybe it'd be better if you sat this one out." The paper edge slipped in my hand. I flattened it again. "Aubrey just thinks it might get too crowded. She's worried about germs, the baby, you know." The baby had been walking since September. I had the video, though I hadn't been tagged in the post. Someone sent it to me out of pity, I think. I watched it once and saved it anyway. "I've already made the pie," I said, but not as an objection. Just a sentence I had committed to out loud. There was a pause on the line like he was flipping through something he'd rehearsed. "This year's gonna be more young energy. You know, just us and a few friends. Something lighter, lighter." I looked at the tag I'd taped onto the box. "To Ellie, with love." I'd used my old script handwriting, the one I practiced in high school, when notes were still passed, not typed. It was a puzzle set shaped like a farmhouse. Her favorite thing last time we talked, though, that had been back in August. "I understand," I said. He hung up with a soft thank you, the kind people use at drive-thrus or bank counters. The paper I'd been folding had creased wrong. I tried to undo the line with my nail, but left it worse. It didn't really matter. The box wasn't going anywhere now. The house was quiet. Aubrey's footsteps had that pinched rhythm heel she wore even inside, always just a little too fast for comfort. They weren't around today. Probably out preparing the young energy decor. My tea had gone cold beside me. A faint ring of brown marked where the cup had sat. I stared at it a moment, then picked up my phone and opened the family group thread. Nothing for over a week. Strange. I scrolled further. Then I tapped the information tab. 3 members. I had been removed. No notice. No message. Just erased. As if one day they'd simply decided that whatever I brought presents noise weight was too much and they moved on. Like swapping out furniture. The ribbon I'd folded into a bow looked too heavy on the small box now. I untied it and rolled it back into its cardboard ring. It left a dent in the soft wrapping paper, like a breath taken, and never returned. Later, I placed the gift under my bed. The box fit snugly, next to a few other things. A sweater I never wore but couldn't give away the church program from Harold's memorial, a postcard Ellie had scribbled on in crayon, the year she turned 2. She'd drawn a cat with no tail and called it Grandma. No one said you're not wanted directly. But some things speak louder in absence. Aubrey once told Caleb, while she thought I was asleep in the next room, she always finds a way to take up space without making noise. It's exhausting. He didn't reply. I wonder if that's what they've been waiting for all along, for me to take the hint, to step aside politely, to stop needing anything. I stared at my hands. The lines across my knuckles were deeper now. The gold ring on my finger spun easily. My hands had thinned this past year. The stone had dulled. I hadn't cleaned it since spring. Harold used to do that. He'd soak it in a teacup with vinegar and warm water. He said sparkle wasn't just for display, it was for memory. I closed my hand slowly. Ellie would open gifts on Christmas morning and I would not be in the pictures. My name would not be under the tree. The pie would not be sliced, or maybe it would made by someone else, or bought frozen warmed up in a hurry, and no one would notice the difference. That was the part that lodged somewhere under my ribs, not that I would be missing, but that my missing would go unnoticed. They would not say anything cruel. They never did. Just small decisions, quiet edits, invitations that didn't come, questions that weren't asked. And now a phone call delivered like a service cancellation, efficient, polite, irreversible. The screen on my phone went dark again. My reflection stared back at me for a moment, softer, maybe smaller than last year. I looked down at the pie crust dough still resting in the fridge. I'd made it from scratch this morning. There was no need to bake it now, but I wouldn't throw it out. Not yet. I reached for the ribbon again, paused, then set it aside. My hands stayed still for a long time. Some silences are chosen, others are handed to you. I decided to keep this one. Some people call it helping when they mean disappearing. I came to the house with 2 suitcases and a tin of flour-dusted recipes folded into thirds. Aubrey had cleared a shelf in the hallway closet for my things, just one, and I remember thanking her, though the shelf sagged slightly and smelled faintly of bleach. I lined it with paper towel before setting anything down. It felt like the polite thing to do. The day after I moved in, I washed every bath towel and folded them the way my mother taught me, tri-folded edges tucked in like quiet hands. Caleb said nothing, only glanced at the stack before sliding them into the linen closet. Aubrey later pulled one out and muttered, not quite to me, "These feel stiff. Maybe not so much starch next time I stopped using starch." Each week, I cleaned behind the oven, the fridge, the baseboards no one else looked at. When I swept under the couch cushions, I found a pacifier, a dried grape, and a pearl earring I didn't recognize. I left it on the counter. It disappeared without acknowledgement. Dinner was always a dance. I cooked early before they got home, just in case. Roasted vegetables, light seasoning brown rice in the old way. Harold liked it with a splash of lemon. Aubrey walked in, once looked at the table, and reached for a protein shake from the fridge. We're doing clean this month. No oil, no salt, no nostalgia. I folded the dish towel over the handle of the oven, smoothed the seam down with 2 fingers. She left the room before I finished. Once I asked about making chicken and dumplings, the kind I used to serve on cold evenings. "We're plant-based now," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Also flour. So no." The 4 p.m. tea had been my habit long before Ellie was born. I kept it going after she came, offering a warm mug to Aubrey when she came home. For a while, she took it with a nod. Then she stopped. The 3rd time I poured and left it by the sink, I returned to find it untouched cold. After that, I stopped leaving it. The teapot grew dusty, and I cleaned it in secret. Caleb worked late most evenings, longer hours once Ellie started daycare. When he came home, he'd kiss his daughter's head, then disappear behind the glow of his phone. When they argued, and they did, often I folded laundry louder than necessary, but never said a word. "She doesn't respect boundaries," I once overheard. "I think she's just trying to help." Unasked help is control, Caleb. I remembered that phrase. Not because it was cruel, but because it was neat. I admired how tightly she packed judgment into a sentence. One afternoon, I brought up the idea of installing a handrail by the front steps. The concrete was slick when it rained, and my ankle had started to twinge now and then. Aubrey didn't look up from her magazine. "This is our home. I don't want it looking like some sad care facility." I nodded. Later, I ran my hand along the wall when I walked down. I wore shoes with better grip after that. Ellie's bedtime was a soft chaos. Bottles, socks that never matched stories, only read halfway. I offered to help. Then I simply started doing it. When she cried in the night, I was often the one who woke, even before the parents did. I never said anything. It didn't feel like a thing worth credit. One night, as I rocked Ellie while she teethed, Aubrey passed the doorway and paused. She only wants you when she's too tired to fight. I wasn't sure if she meant the child or herself. During family calls, I stayed out of frame. Once Aubrey laughed and told someone, "She's still here, just ghosting around in the background like a polite little helper." At church, people asked how I was settling in. I told them it was a blessing to be near my granddaughter. That was true in the way rain is good for crops, even when it floods your shoes. There was a sweater I loved, a thick green knit with wooden buttons down the front. I wore it often until one afternoon, as I walked into the living room, Aubrey wrinkled her nose. "That thing looks like it came out of a cedar chest from 1972. I folded it up that night and tucked it under the bed. Haven't worn it since. Caleb once caught me dusting the tops of the picture frames. "You don't have to do all that, Mom." I shrugged. "Sometimes it helps me sleep." He nodded, though I don't think he understood what I meant. Or maybe he did and chose not to hear it. I never fought. I never raised my voice. I learned the quiet rhythms of their lives and wove myself around them like a draft stopper at the bottom of a door, visible only when in the way. I kept my phone on silent. I adjusted doctor's appointments to avoid interrupting Aubrey's yoga schedule. I bought groceries that fit their diet, even though I didn't understand it. I changed my toothpaste brand after she mentioned the smell was too strong. None of it was asked for. None of it was wrong. But over time, I noticed that every corner I softened became a space I no longer belonged to. Some people think harmony is everyone being quiet. I used to think so too. Now I think it might just be one person swallowing sound over and over until nothing echoes back. And I was very good at swallowing. They used to call it manageable. That's what I kept turning over in my head as I left the clinic, holding the printout with trembling fingers. The paper had a slight crease from how tightly I folded it, even though the nurse had handed it to me perfectly flat. Rheumatoid arthritis progressive stage. Not reversible. Not mild. Not just stiffness. I didn't take the bus back right away. I sat on the wooden bench outside the pharmacy, purse on my lap, and looked at the corner where the laminate had peeled away. A girl across the street held a balloon. It slipped from her hand. She cried, but no one noticed. When I stepped into the house later, no one asked why I was late. Aubrey was laying out napkins. Matching ones this time. Caleb was stirring something on the stove, eyes on the clock. I waited until after dinner. Not because I was afraid, just out of habit. I didn't want to bring discomfort to the table. I'd done that once years ago with a question about the thermostat, and the silence had lasted 3 days. They were laughing at something Ellie said. Her spoon clattered against her bowl milk, splashing just a little. I placed the folded diagnosis beside my teacup. No one noticed. "I saw Dr. Halperin this morning." I began quiet, but not unsure. The inflammation's getting worse. My grip isn't steady anymore. I may need help with buttons, jars, things like that. Aubrey's spoon dropped mid-scoop. The sound it made wasn't loud, but it landed hard. Caleb looked down at his plate. His fork hadn't moved in a while. "You're telling us this at dinner?" I didn't respond. I placed the paper next to my water glass. "I'm not a nurse," she continued. Her tone was even. "I didn't marry into this to end up bathing someone who can't manage basic hygiene." I could still feel the corners of the prescription under my fingertips. "I just thought, if we adjusted a few things, a small rail in the hall, maybe no." Her voice didn't rise. It only sharpened. "This is my home. I don't want it to look like a retirement brochure." Caleb shifted in his seat. His shirt had a loose thread at the sleeve. He kept tugging at it. "I'm not asking to be waited on. Just to stay involved. With Ellie. With the kitchen. I can still." Aubrey stood up. "You can't still. That's the point." She pointed toward the living room without looking. "Go there. Lie down. Watch TV." Just don't infect the house with decline. I heard her walk to the sink. The water started running. Not full blast, just enough to muffle Caleb's voice when he finally said, "Maybe you should start thinking about a place better equipped." I looked at him, at the lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before, at how he couldn't meet my eyes. I mean, he continued, "Somewhere that has handles. People who know how to handle this." The tea was still warm. I lifted the cup, blew on it out of instinct. The steam had already faded. Aubrey turned back from the sink, wiping her hands with the towel I used every morning. "I'm 29. I shouldn't have to wake up to the smell of menthol rub and defeat." No one said anything after that. I heard the faint hum of the fridge. Ellie was humming from the hallway, unaware. I looked at the table. The placement mats were new. I'd chosen them last year, thinking the woven texture would look modern. Aubrey said nothing when I brought them home. That silence had felt colder than this. There was a time when I used to bake every Saturday morning, leave a plate on the counter for them. After the first month, no one touched them. I started baking less. I stood slowly. The bones in my knees had a rhythm now, a muted clicking that only I heard. I poured the rest of my tea. No one moved. No one stopped me. In the hallway, I passed the shelf with the picture frames. One had fallen slightly forward. I fixed it without thinking. A photo of the three of them on the beach. I had taken that photo. There was no frame with me in it. I returned to my room and unfolded the paper again. My name in bold, Lorraine Barrett. The rest of the page, a list of limitations. Words like assistive and accommodations and progressive decline. The font was clean. Sans serif. Nothing dramatic. No one meant for it to cut, but it did. Later that night, I found my wool cardigan draped over the banister. I had left it in the laundry basket. Someone had picked it out, folded it. Maybe Aubrey, maybe Caleb. It didn't matter. The sleeves were still damp. I lay it across the foot of my bed, smoothed it down. In the quiet, I touched the edge of the paper again, then the wooden drawer where I kept a small velvet box. Inside it, an old silver pin, tarnished around the edges. Caleb gave it to me on Mother's Day when he was 9. Said I was strong like trees. I closed the drawer. No ceremony, no anger. Only one thought settled clean and clear. This was not forgetting. This was being erased. I always noticed when a drawer closed too easily. The way something once full gave way with no resistance. The same drawer where I used to keep scarves and spare birthday cards now held only 3 pairs of socks and an empty glasses case. I folded a towel over my knee, slow and neat, though I had nowhere to place it. Some habits wait longer than they're needed. Their voices came through the floor, muffled but unmistakable. I didn't mean to listen only to sit, but sometimes sitting is enough to hear everything. She expects me to start bathing her next. Not shouted, just stated, even and clear, no cracks in her voice. Aubrey never cracked. I already have one child. I don't need a second one who creaks and groans and smells like ointment. A pause followed, long enough for a response. Caleb's voice didn't come. "I'm not washing out pill cups. I'm not picking up socks she drops. I'm not lifting her out of chairs." Another pause. Then I didn't sign up for this. I looked down at my hands. The blue thread on my sleeve had frayed near the cuff. I'd sewn it last year after Ellie tugged too hard during a game of pretend tea. I hadn't fixed it since. "You said it'd be temporary," she continued. "Now she's rearranging the pantry like it's her house. She's not trying to—" She already has a doctor's note. You know what comes next. Sit-down showers, transfer chairs, tub rails, then it's sponge baths and middle-of-the-night help with the toilet. I stood. Not to interrupt, just to stretch. My knees didn't bend the way they used to, but I didn't make a sound. She needs help, Caleb said. Real help. I can't give it, and I won't. I walked to the door, but my hand rested just short of the knob. She's becoming a weight, Aubrey said. It's cruel to say it, but it's crueler not to. I stepped into the hallway. They both turned. Caleb straightened quickly. Aubrey didn't flinch. There's something we want you to consider, Caleb began, already unsure. Aubrey walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer with the junk mail, and pulled out 3 brochures. She fanned them out on the counter like playing cards. Bright photos, pastel walls, and old women smiling through 2 white teeth. They specialize in elder care, she said. Trained staff, nutrition plans, activities every Tuesday. Her nails tapped the edge of one paper. And clean. No staircases. Caleb stepped in beside her. They're nearby. You'd have visitors. You'd have professionals who know what they're doing. I glanced at the brochures. One was already dog-eared. Rose Pines was circled in blue ink. They take Medicare. There's a waiting list, but we can help get you in sooner, he continued. This isn't about rejection, Aubrey said. It's about reality. She crossed her arms. We've done our part. We let you stay. We adjusted. But now it's time to shift. I didn't speak. I reached for the kettle instead. I filled it halfway. Enough for 1 cup. The stove clicked twice before it lit. We're not heartless, Caleb added. It's just everything's tighter now. Ellie's starting school. My hours are increasing, and Aubrey's been overwhelmed. She didn't correct him. It's not sustainable, she said. Not for you, not for us. Her hand slid 1 brochure closer to me. The photo on the front showed a garden. Artificial trimmed, a man with a walker feeding pigeons. No names. No faces I knew. This is a grown-up decision, she continued. The kind people make when they love someone but can't carry them anymore. Caleb said nothing. We'll help with the paperwork, she said, but this can't go on. I looked at the brochures again. Not long, just enough to understand. They weren't suggestions, they were exits. On the fridge, Ellie's drawing still hung crooked. Stick figures labeled with clumsy handwriting. Mom, Dad, me. No grandma, just space between. I poured the hot water over a tea bag, the string folded in on itself. No one asked if I wanted sugar. No one looked at my cup. I'm not trying to be cruel, Aubrey said softly now, but I won't share a bathroom with someone who needs handrails and stool softeners. My fingers touched the rim of the cup. Still too hot to drink. Caleb took a breath. Mom, maybe it's time. I turned toward the drawer and took out the spoon I always used, the one with the faded floral engraving. I stirred slowly, not because the tea needed stirring, because I needed a reason to stay still. They waited for a word, a sound, some form of surrender. I gave them none. Instead, I picked up the brochure with the circled option and folded it into thirds. I slid it into the side pocket of my sweater. Not as agreement, not as acceptance, just as silence in a form they could read. Aubrey exhaled, a sound of relief. Caleb looked down. This will be better for all of us, she said. I placed my cup on the table. The tea had gone lukewarm. I didn't drink it. No one asked where I'd go first. No one asked what I'd need. Their job was done the moment I folded that paper. Later, I opened my drawer again. I pushed aside the socks and found the old pill box Victor had once carried for me. The label had faded, but I kept it anyway, because some things don't belong in brochures, and some silences aren't quiet. They just no longer need to explain themselves. There's a weight to silence that no sound can match. It fills the corners of a room like fog clinging to the edges of folded shirts and the lining of a suitcase that hasn't moved in years. I took the smaller suitcase, the one with the broken zipper tab I'd once fixed with a paperclip. It didn't glide smoothly across the carpet, but I didn't drag it hard either. I folded 2 sweaters, 3 blouses, 1 pair of slacks, and the thick socks I'd bought on clearance last winter. The nightgown with the little blue buttons went in last. Not because it mattered, but because I didn't want it wrinkled. No one came upstairs. The closet looked larger once I'd removed my things. Bare hangers clinked together like teeth in the cold. A moth had eaten a hole in the shoulder of my old beige cardigan. I left it behind. Downstairs, Caleb stood by the hallway table, holding his phone like it might shield him. He didn't say anything at first. Just cleared his throat then. "You sure about this?" "Mom?" I didn't pause. "Yes." He shifted his weight. "It doesn't have to be this way." I looked at the framed photo beside him. Christmas 5 years ago. I was in the background handing someone a plate. The only part of me in focus was my left hand blurry from motion holding a pie server. I didn't remember anyone asking me to pose. "I don't want anyone to feel burdened," I said. My voice sounded like it had come from somewhere just outside my body. "I mean, we care, obviously," he said too quickly. I nodded. Aubrey came out of the kitchen. She didn't glance at my bag. "If you need anything," she said, curling a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just not during school runs. Mornings are chaos." I zipped the suitcase the rest of the way. The sound echoed louder than expected. I left the number of the assisted housing center on the counter. "They have an opening." Her voice was smooth rehearsed. I picked up the small tin of hand cream from the console drawer. One of the few things I still bought for myself. It smelled faintly of lavender and metal. She added as if finishing a memo. "And please text, don't call. Text is easier." I slid on my coat, the green one with the tear under the lining that I never fixed. Caleb opened the door, not saying a word. The cab waited at the curb. I had booked it myself. "Where are you going to stay?" he asked, eyes on the sidewalk. "Somewhere quiet." He nodded. "Okay." I didn't reach out for a hug, neither did he. Before stepping out, I turned back once, just long enough to pull the small family photo off the shelf. The only one where I stood beside Harold, both of us looking ahead, not at the camera, but somewhere past it. Caleb had been just a boy then, clutching his father's pant leg. Aubrey wasn't in it. Neither was anyone else. The cab driver didn't speak. I was grateful. Inside my coat pocket, I felt the curve of Harold's ring, the one I'd stopped wearing after the arthritis made my knuckles swell. I hadn't wanted to give it up completely. So I kept it tucked away, like a word you no longer say aloud but don't forget the shape of. From the back seat, I saw Aubrey pull the curtains partway just enough to check if I'd gone, not enough to be caught watching. The house stood there with its polished windows, its perfect hedges, and the light still blinking on the answering machine, 2 unheard messages. I thought of the list on the fridge. Aubrey's handwriting was sharp efficient. Almond milk, wipes, organic granola. Don't forget, dispose of expired Tylenol. I had added nothing to it in weeks. I didn't leave a note. I didn't take any keepsake furniture or argue for my space. I didn't ask for Caleb's help carrying the bag. I didn't look to see if the porch light stayed on. At the stoplight, I glanced down and realized my hands had left faint flour-like smudges on the fabric of my suitcase handle. From the bathroom cleaner, I used to scrub the grout last night. No one had noticed. The tin of hand cream rattled faintly in the side pocket as the car turned. A soft sound, but present, like something trying to say you're still here. I closed my fingers around the ring in my pocket and thought of what it felt like on my finger during winters. It would twist loose from the dryness, and I'd worry about losing it while washing dishes. Harold used to joke, "If you drop that ring again, I'll tie it to your hand." I never dropped it. I just stopped wearing it when the pain came. Caleb never asked why. Outside, the sky turned the color of diluted ash. Streetlights blinked on. A boy ran up a driveway with a lunchbox in hand. His mother held the door open. She didn't wave, but she waited until he was inside. I don't know if I expected anything when I left that house. Not regret, not grief, not relief either. Just the sound of the zipper closing the shuffle of my steps, and a quiet that stretched like thread, unbroken. What I carried with me fit in one bag, one pocket, one frame, and that was enough. I didn't expect silence to have weight, but it pressed against my shoulders as soon as the door latched behind me. The apartment smelled faintly of old paint, and something else, distant and clean, like linen forgotten in a drawer. I slid the suitcase across the uneven floor and let it rest by the corner. The walls bore marks where pictures had once hung. I traced one outline with my finger. It felt like someone else's memory. Mr. Boone had handed me the key earlier without much ceremony. "It's not pretty," he muttered, eyes on the sidewalk, "but no one will make you feel small here." Then he tipped his hat and turned as if any more words would crowd the hallway. The kitchen was barely large enough to turn around in. The counter had a burn mark the shape of a pan too hot and a moment too long. A single spoon sat in the drawer. The refrigerator clicked every few minutes like an old metronome. I stood in the center of the room, not moving. Just still. I opened the box labeled kitchen. Inside, wrapped in a dish towel with a floral pattern long faded, was the teapot. Porcelain, pale blue, with a crack under the spout that never leaked. I had stopped using it after the third time no one touched their cup. But I had brought it anyway. The burner clicked as I turned it on. A flame caught. The kettle hissed in stages, slowly coming to life. I reached for a tin of tea leaves I had tucked into the side pocket of my bag. Jasmine. The scent had once filled the Whitaker house on Sunday afternoons. I used to think it meant something, that the smell alone could thread people together. I poured the water. The tea turned the right shade. I waited, then sat with the cup between my palms. The heat lingered. No one frowned at the steam. No one told me it was outdated. The first sip wasn't remarkable, but it stayed with me. The radiator clanked once, then went quiet. I watched the light from the hallway stretch under the door. No footsteps followed. No voices rose behind walls. The silence, at first too wide, became a coat I could button around myself. At some point, I opened the small closet by the front door. Inside was a single hanger and an old wool coat someone had forgotten. I touched the hem. It was heavier than I expected, lined but torn. Still, it hung with dignity. My suitcase held only what mattered. 3 changes of clothes, a letter from my mother written in faded ink, a small sewing kit, and Harold's ring wrapped in the handkerchief I'd once placed in his jacket pocket before his job interviews. The cloth still held a faint scent of cedar. I unwrapped it and placed the ring on the shelf above the sink. I didn't wear it anymore. Not because I had stopped remembering, but because memory wasn't something that needed to be worn to exist. I opened a second box labeled Miss. Inside, between 2 sweaters, was a photo. 4 faces. Caleb was maybe 10. I was holding a pie. Harold stood behind me with his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. We looked into the camera like we expected something on the other side. I didn't put it on the wall. I just looked at it, then slipped it back between the folds of fabric. Some things, when left in view, begin to rot. There was a knock, once light, almost polite. I didn't answer, likely Mr. Boone checking if the pilot light worked. I would tell him tomorrow. Or not. I wasn't in a hurry to explain myself to anyone. The next morning, I folded the dish towel neatly over the teapot and set it on the shelf above the sink. A row of 3 hooks sat below it, one slightly bent. I hung my cardigan there. The one with the stretched cuffs. The one no one noticed I wore nearly every day. I made a list on the back of an envelope: bread, canned soup, paper towels. Nothing extravagant. I underlined soup twice. My joints ached less when I kept warm. At noon, I wiped the counter with a cloth I had stitched years ago. One corner had come undone. I would fix it later. Or leave it. There was no television. I didn't miss it. The radio in my bag needed batteries. I placed it on the windowsill and opened the window half an inch. Air moved differently when it wasn't shared. In the evening, I wrote a note to myself in the margins of an old book: heat water. Sit down. Finish the cup. That felt like enough of a plan. The bed creaked when I sat. The sheets were clean, though mismatched. I had once cared about such things. Now I folded the edge under my chin and watched the shadows move on the ceiling. I thought I heard a door close down the hall, then someone turning a page in the unit above mine. No one was shouting. No one had opinions about my footsteps or how often I cleared my throat. My teacup was still on the table, half full. I let it be. At midnight, I woke briefly and didn't know where I was. Then I saw the cardigan on the hook and the folded towel and remembered I had chosen this. In the morning, I would look for a thrift store. Maybe a chair that didn't wobble. Maybe a plant. Something alive but low maintenance. But for now, I listened to the radiator settle again. The kettle emptied, rested in the sink. I didn't rush to clean it. I didn't rush to do anything. Somewhere between the first and second sip of tea, I had remembered what stillness could feel like when no one was watching you use it up. And that, I decided, was the beginning of enough. Some people return not because they remember you, but because they remember what you once gave. I folded a grocery receipt in half, then again until it disappeared into a square. The numbers no longer mattered. I'd already memorized them. I left the receipt on the table next to the chipped sugar jar that once sat in my old kitchen. It still had the faint mark from where Aubrey once slammed it shut. Not out of anger, just out of speed. She always said she didn't have time for soft things. Caleb called 3 weeks after I left. I recognized the area code before the phone finished buzzing. He didn't speak right away. Just a breath held too long. Then one line clipped short. I was wondering if I could see you, just for a bit. No mention of where I was. No, how are you or we miss you. Just space-filling syllables like a polite cough. I said yes. I didn't ask why. The next day, he arrived with a grocery bag of papers and a blue folder sticking out like a stiff collar. He didn't sit right away. His eyes moved too much. I'm not here to blame anyone. We just thought maybe you could look at this. The lease? A late notice. The amount circled in red pen. A handwritten note from the building management tucked behind it. Failure to remit will result in legal proceedings. You have 10 business days. I noticed the handwriting first. Someone had taken care to underline the words. Not printed, not generic, personal. I didn't know the loan was still tied to your name. I folded the paper back into the envelope. The seal was broken when it reached me. They said you were a cosigner. From back then. I thought we had it covered, but then my shifts were cut. And then Aubrey, well, she's not with the boutique anymore. He stopped. Waited. Perhaps for me to ask what happened, I didn't. The folder slid across the table toward me. Its edge bumped the sugar jar. He adjusted it. It's not a lot. We're not asking for a handout. Just a little time. Maybe you could help cover this month and we'll pay you back. Or we could move in with you for a little while, just until we figure it out. I remembered the coat I wore when I left their house. The hem had frayed near the bottom where the thread had come loose years ago. I had meant to fix it, but never did. The tear sat on my lap in the cab, a quiet little truth no one had noticed. Even now, I hadn't sewn it. Not out of pride, just forgetfulness. I live in one bedroom. There's a single bed, and the fridge leans to the left. He smiled too quickly. We're fine with small. I didn't answer. 2 days later, Aubrey met me at a cafe near the bus terminal. She didn't order anything. She hadn't brushed her hair. Her scarf was wrapped too tight, like she'd forgotten how to wear it. There were faint marks beneath her eyes, the kind makeup can't erase. She sat across from me, both hands gripping her purse. I'm not here to pretend, she said, eyes darting to the table. This isn't some emotional reunion. I just figured, considering how things were, maybe you could extend some help. She pressed her lips together, then added, I mean, you did live in our house. You ate there, slept there. I took a sip from my cup. The handle had a tiny chip where someone once dropped it years ago. It had never cut my hand, but I never fixed it either. Just turned it a little in my fingers each time. I stayed in your house, but it never felt like I lived there. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes shifted toward the door. I'm not asking for much. Just a roof. You wouldn't have to cook or do anything. Just give us time to breathe. I noticed her nails were bare, no polish, just raw, clipped edges. Breathe. I repeated, not as a question, just as a word I hadn't heard them use gently before. She shifted again. You weren't thrown out, Lorraine. You left. That was your decision. I stirred my coffee. The spoon clinked too loudly, so I stopped. She was still talking, but the words blurred into each other like white noise through drywall. You were never meant to feel like an outsider, she said, fingers tightening around the purse strap. But you were never really part of us either. That wasn't malicious. It's just how things evolved. I folded the napkin next to my saucer, creased it in the middle, then again. We're not saying we need you, just that it'd make sense. We're family. The word felt oddly placed, like someone putting a fork in the wrong drawer. A waiter passed, pausing near our table. She waved him off without looking up. I'm tired of pretending we didn't all make mistakes, she continued. But don't act like this isn't partly yours, too. The cup was empty by then. I looked at the bottom. A single grain of undissolved sugar sat in the corner. I won't stay where I'm not wanted, I said. But I don't need apologies to see the truth. She blinked, as if startled by how quiet my voice had been, or perhaps by the fact that I hadn't raised it. You'd rather see us on the street than help. I shook my head just once. I'd rather not be treated like a contingency plan. She stood up before the check came. Didn't say goodbye. That night I refolded the laundry. I didn't need to, it was already neat. But I went through the motions anyway, touching each seam, checking for holes. A shirt button was loose. I threaded a needle and fixed it without turning on the television. I placed the shirt back in the drawer. They had come back, but not for me. And that somehow made everything clear. I didn't notice the change until I stopped checking the door before going to sleep. The habit of listening for footsteps, for voices behind walls, had simply vanished. Each morning began with the sound of ceramic scraping gently on wood. My teacup. A small blue one with a chip on the rim barely noticeable, unless your lips brushed it. I'd bought it at a yard sale a decade ago and never used it until now. It was the first object that felt like mine again. Mavis started showing up around 6. She never knocked, just waited by the stair rail with her knit gloves in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. I didn't ask what was inside, and she never offered. We walked in silence most days. Around the block. Past the church with the rusted bell. Past the house with wind chimes that never stopped clinking. Her steps were slow but steady. Mine matched hers. At home, I folded receipts, sorted coins into little jars, I wrote down everything I spent, just like I used to when Harold ran the garage, and every penny mattered. Not because I needed to, but because it steadied me. The numbers didn't lie, didn't shift mid-sentence. The largest unit in the building stayed empty. I didn't advertise it. People asked sometimes when they passed in the hall. "You saving it for someone?" I only shook my head. One afternoon, the girl from 2B knocked on my door. She held a toddler against her hip purse, sliding off her shoulder. "Could you maybe watch him for an hour? I've got a shift at the diner and my sister flaked again." I looked at the boy. Sticky cheeks, wide eyes, a string dangling from his sweatshirt. I nodded. She exhaled. "Thanks, Miss Lorraine. You're a lifesaver." That was the first time someone called me by name without attaching it to obligation. No sigh, no edge, no transactional pause. Just said it plainly, like it meant something good. He fell asleep on my couch with a cracker still in his hand. Caleb called later that week. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Mom, could we maybe talk just if you have time?" 3 days later, I saw him outside the building. He stood across the street in that same coat he used to wear in college, collar fraying near the neck. "Can I come up?" I didn't respond right away. Just turned and led him to the stairwell. In my apartment, he stood near the wall like he wasn't sure what to touch. "Place looks clean." I poured tea into 2 cups. Mine, the chipped blue one. His, a plain white mug that came with the building. I set them on the table without a word. He sat, but didn't drink. "Things have been hard." I watched the steam curl from my cup. "Aubrey, she lost the baby. We didn't tell anyone. It was early. She's been sleeping most days. Doesn't really talk." He rubbed the side of his face. "I took out loans, too many. The pharmacy cut my hours and we missed rent. Got a notice." He didn't look up. I think about that day, when you said it was arthritis, when I just stood there. I don't even know why I said what I said. I let him speak. If I could go back, I'd do it different. I would. I didn't know what to do. The room held a stillness thick and low like fog in the lungs. "There's no way to go back to that day." He nodded slowly. "But you could still walk in another direction, if you mean it." He finally looked at me. Not as his mother. Not as the woman who folded his shirts in high school or stayed up nights during his fevers. Just as someone across a table offering a kind of quiet he didn't recognize. He took a sip. Winced it was too hot. "I forgot you always steep it strong." I folded my hands. He shifted in his seat. "I don't expect you to forgive anything. I just didn't know where else to go." A long pause followed, as if the walls were waiting too. "I'm not where you go because there's nowhere left. I'm not the last chair in the room." He nodded eyes on the mug now. "I didn't come to ask for money. I said nothing. I just didn't know if you'd even open the door." The tea cooled. I rose and walked to the window, not to see the street, but to look at the frame. The seal around the glass had chipped and cold always crept in no matter how tightly it closed. "You can sit a while, but I won't offer answers. Not this time." He leaned back. "Maybe that's fair." His hands trembled slightly on the cup, and for the first time I saw how thin he'd become. But I didn't comment. I let him finish the tea in silence. When he left, he didn't hug me, just nodded, like 2 people agreeing on something unspoken. The chipped cup remained on the table, steam gone. Lip print faintly visible on the rim. I didn't clear it. I just sat looking at the space between 2 mugs and realized something had shifted, not in him, but in me. Not softer, not harder, just no longer waiting. They looked thinner than I remembered. Not in the way people lose weight, but in the way paper does when it's been folded and unfolded too many times. I stood at the door with one hand still on the knob, not because I planned to open or close it again, but because I wasn't sure which gesture fit the moment. The child had grown. She held something in her arms, a worn plush bear with one ear nearly flattened. I hadn't seen that bear in years. I remembered sewing the small patch on its belly when she spilled juice on it. She hadn't met my eyes, but she held the bear like she knew its weight by memory. Caleb carried a white box with a printed ribbon. I could see through the waxed paper top, lemon cookies dusted with powdered sugar, the kind that always left streaks on sleeves and counters. He didn't say much, but enough. We were wrong, all of us. I know you owe us nothing, but if you allow it, maybe you could come back home. Or let us come home. To you. The words didn't echo. They landed soft like dust. Nothing in me stirred to reply quickly. I had spent too many mornings folding grocery receipts in half and keeping them in a jar. Not because I needed to track every cent, but because it made me feel that I was still part of something measurable. I had come to know the corners of this apartment in a way no one else would. Where the floor creaked most, how long the kettle took, what time the neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Home wasn't where you came to beg. It was where you never had to. I watched the girl shift the bear between her arms. Her shoes looked tight. Someone had tried to braid her hair and stopped halfway, like they ran out of time or care. Caleb looked down at the ground as if the welcome he hoped for had fallen there. I don't have a place to go back to, I said, but I do have a place that's still open. Not for apologies. For beginning again. I walked to the small cabinet near the window and pulled out a key. The brass had dulled at the edges. I'd kept it wrapped in an old napkin inside a small porcelain dish that once belonged to my mother. It was the key to the biggest unit in the building, the one I'd left empty since I bought it. I never called it mine. I just called it ready. I didn't hand the key to Caleb right away. I placed it in his hand, palm up the way I once handed him cold medicine when he was small and fevered. It's not to erase what happened. It's only to let something else happen. Aubrey hadn't spoken. She wore no makeup this time, and her hands were clasped tight behind her back, like a child at a funeral. Her eyes looked like they hadn't closed fully in days. Don't expect anything from me, I said, except silence if that's what's needed. And maybe tea? She looked up briefly, just once, and I saw in her expression something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not shame, just space. A small clearing where words might one day grow. They stepped inside. The girl first, then Caleb, then Aubrey behind them. I didn't offer them chairs. I didn't ask questions. I turned toward the kitchen, lifted the old kettle by its wooden handle, and began the slow steps I knew by habit. The tea I made that day wasn't special. Just plain black leaves in the same chipped cup I'd used since moving in. But no one left their cup untouched this time. No one placed it too far from their reach. No one said it was too hot or too much. There were no stories exchanged, no explanations. The silence wasn't strained. It wasn't peace either. It was the breath before the sentence. The hallway before the door. I watched Caleb take a long sip and close his eyes just for a second, like the warmth surprised him. The girl still holding the bear said softly, "Can he stay here too?" I didn't ask who she meant. I just looked at the small form wrapped in her arms, worn and familiar, a bear that had lived through more than it had been built for. I reached for another cup and poured half of what remained in the kettle. I pushed it gently toward her side of the table. She nodded once, the kind children give when they think they've done something right. Aubrey placed her empty cup back onto the saucer without sound. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't try to hide it. "We'll take the upstairs place," Caleb said, "if that's all right." "It's unlocked," I answered. I didn't follow them. I didn't ask when they'd leave or how long they'd stay. I didn't offer linens or ask about their plans. I only turned back to the sink, rinsed the 3 cups under lukewarm water, and placed them on the drying rack. I let the water drip without drying them. They left the door slightly ajar as they stepped out. I closed it when I heard their footsteps fade up the stairs. Not all the way, just until it clicked. I went back to the cabinet, pulled out the last of the lemon cookies I hadn't shared, and placed one on the saucer that still held warmth. I didn't eat it. I just watched the powdered sugar melt into the porcelain like something letting go. No voices followed. No accusations, no apologies. No doors slamming or paper being folded. For once, no one looked for my name on a lease. No one corrected how I brewed tea. No one moved my cup when I wasn't watching. I thought of the patch on the bear's stomach. The crooked stitches, the little uneven edge I never got around to fixing. It had stayed that way all these years. Broken, but held. Like some things aren't meant to be restored, only carried forward. I used to count the silences in a room the way some count steps. 1 for every pause after a sentence. 2 for the times no one looked up. 3, when someone left the chair pulled out and didn't come back. This morning, there weren't any. She moved quietly in the kitchen. No perfume, no clicking heels, just a soft brushing of slippers against the tile. The kettle didn't whistle. She turned it off just before it could. I watched her fingertips hover over the tea tins before she chose one I used to save for Sundays. I hope this kind is okay. I left the other in the drawer. I wasn't sure which you liked best. I sat without answering. The cushion under me had been adjusted higher, firmer. The creak of the chair didn't come from age anymore, but from being cared for. She poured the water with both hands, steady. No rush. A small plate slid beside the teacup. 2 pieces of toast, 1 with marmalade, the kind I once offered her, and she never touched. "Mama, if the tea's too light, just say so. I can steep it longer next time." The tea was weak, but her voice wasn't. I didn't correct her. I picked up the cup with both hands, felt the warmth pass through my palms. Some gestures need no improvement. Across the table, her daughter was coloring inside a traced outline of a tree. 1 crayon rolled off and hit the floor, and she didn't cry, just picked it up and kept going. I watched her little fingers grip the green like it was a decision. Aubrey sat opposite me. Her blouse was plain, a soft gray with a missing button she hadn't tried to hide. Her nails were short, clean, unpainted. The ring on her hand was the same, but something about the way she wore it had changed. It no longer flashed, it held. "I used to think it was weakness," she said, folding a napkin she hadn't used. "Letting people in. Letting someone see you need help." She didn't look up. But now I wonder if maybe I was the one who didn't have enough strength to carry anyone else. She reached across to wipe a crumb from her daughter's lip. The little girl leaned into the touch without flinching. I never saw anyone take care of a mother before. Not really. Not when she got older, slower. I didn't know how. I ran my thumb along the rim of the teacup. 1 small chip on the side, barely noticeable. I always turned it inward so no one could see. "I wanted my daughter to see something else," she continued. "That family isn't what you take, it's who you stay for." I placed the cup down. The small tap against the saucer seemed louder than it should have been. There was a time, I said, when I thought love had to be earned. That if you gave more, waited longer, stayed quieter, you'd be invited in. I looked toward the hallway where their coats now hung. Hers next to mine, not below it. Not behind a door. But now I think maybe you're ready when you learn to give it even if no one hands it back. She didn't speak again. She just nodded once slowly, like the words were something she'd already heard in her own mind. She reached for the teapot, refilled my cup without asking. That was enough. Later, I opened the drawer where I used to keep lists, shopping medication bills. Now it held different paper, a small notebook, the kind people give you and say for recipes or for writing down thoughts. The first page had been blank for months. Today, I wrote, today, not because I was welcomed, but because I stayed. Outside, I sat with the sun resting across my lap. The old wooden bench warmed beneath me. A new cushion someone had added made it softer, but I could still feel the familiar ridge down the middle. I didn't mind. Not everything has to be smooth to feel like home. The breeze carried her voice through the screen door. Mama, I can go with you for a walk later if you'd like. I think your pillow needs adjusting. The one for your neck. It was a little flat last night, wasn't it? I didn't answer right away. I watched a single ant crawl across the porch railing, weaving between the grains of the wood. The tea cooled slowly in my hand. Not bitter, not sweet, just as it was. I looked down at the ring I no longer wore. It sat in a drawer, now wrapped in tissue. I hadn't thrown it away. Some things are not meant to be carried, only remembered. From inside, I heard a giggle. Not forced, not trying, just the kind that slips out when someone feels safe. I placed my cup on the armrest fingers, brushing the edge of the notebook still open beside me. For years, I had tried to write my name in someone else's story. Now, I was writing a new one with no need to underline it. I had once been the one who waited at the door, who knocked softly hoping someone would say, "Come in." But this time, I was already inside. And they had returned, not for apology, not for forgiveness, but because they saw something worth staying near. I didn't need a mirror to know what I looked like. I didn't need applause to know what I'd done. I didn't need proof anymore. I heard footsteps behind me. "I'll bring your shawl," she said gently. "It might get cool later." I didn't respond. Not because I hadn't heard her, but because I had. And that was enough.